Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming, and happy belated Martin Luther King Jr. Day. I've been Washington Attorney General for just over a year now, and just want to start by saying how proud I am to lead this office and all of the people that work here on behalf of the state of Washington. I get to work with so many who get up every day to make our government better for all Washingtonians. My gratitude is only heightened by the challenges that we face, both here, those here in Washington and those we face from the other Washington that harm our state. My obligation as the Attorney General is to be an advocate for the rule of law and for the Washington state and U.S. constitutions. I get to do that in a position that can make a significant difference on people's life, and I'm really grateful for all of the state employees across the agency that work here hard for Washingtonians. We're also 1 year into addressing the impacts from the Trump administration, and we are facing a president who has shown over and over and over again that he has no respect for the rule of law, no respect for Congress, no respect for judges, frankly, no respect to anyone that disagrees with him and doesn't bend to his will. He rules quite often by anger, hate even, and petty grievances, and really, at the end of the day, has demonstrated a real lack of humanity for the people that he serves. Last spring, when we talked about the emerging threats from the Trump administration, I started to call what we were seeing from the Trump administration as elements of fascism. Even then, I could not conceive of how lawless this president would be acting, both here domestically and abroad. These un-American actions do not represent the nation well, and America should demand better of their president. In this Washington, it is important that we set an example of a government that works for the people, and sometimes that means pushing back to defend our state. That's why just over a year into office, we have filed 52 lawsuits in 52 weeks against the federal government's overreach, lawlessness, and refusal to live by its obligation to serve the people. Unlike the president's immigration policies, this is not driven by some bureaucratic quota. In every case, it's driven by really three important factors. One is what we're seeing from the president unlawful or unconstitutional. Two, does it impact the state of Washington? And three, do we need to be a party to make sure that we can defend our rights? People in this state want affordability and opportunity, freedom and civil rights. They want to protect our environment. They want transparency and accountability. They want their tax dollars to work for them. They want a quality education for their kids, strong consumer protections, health care, and the dignity of not being lied to by people in power. And for the last year, the administration has put all of these things further out of reach from the public. But we in the AG's office have done our best to protect programs and services that have protected over $15 billion to Washington state. $15 billion that would have been cut had we not fought back against the Trump administration. That is money that would have gone towards public safety, transportation, nutrition services, health care, job training, small business support, emergency preparations, energy infrastructure, and climate resilience. We've also protected what it means to be a citizen in the United States of America. We've saved public health programs, including Washington's mobile health clinics that take free services into health care deserts. Federally funded programs for survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault will continue, not because of what the administration did, but because of what we did to oppose their proposed cuts. We've also worked hard to save mental health programs for students, hospital research funding that was threatened if they wouldn't discriminate against transgender patients. Planned Parenthood and other healthcare centers won't lose funding because we stood up to these unconstitutional actions by the administration. We also worked hard to make sure that the public was fed. We stopped the federal government from cutting off SNAP benefits under false pretexts, from the federal shutdown to Trump's illegal efforts to tie assistance to immigration enforcement. And we stopped HUD from kicking thousands and thousands of people out of housing at the end of last year. The people of this office care deeply about the impacts on Washingtonians from what we're seeing from Washington, D.C. Our work is also made possible by the many, many Washingtonians who are willing to share their stories in court to defend the work that we're doing against the administration. And everything that I just talked about, frankly, is only a small part of the overall work in the office. The small part of the nearly 2,000 employees who show up every day to work hard on behalf of their state. We're busy representing and helping every state agency, board, and commission. We're helping local law enforcement officers and prosecutors prosecute criminals. We're enforcing laws that protect the public against predators, scam artists, slumlords, and businesses that steal workers' wages here in Washington. My team's greatest tool is the rule of law. We got workers compensated when their rights were violated. We have gotten justice for consumers when they were misled by pyramid schemes and false advertising. We defend small businesses, whether it was going after organized retail crime or holding Google accountable for the way that their advertising monopoly tied the hands of entrepreneurs trying to get notice. We've also got justice for families robbed by the inheritance fraudsters abusing the state's probate system. And we have a bill this session that will make it harder to scam artists to abuse the system. We got people housed and made some unscrupulous landlords follow the law, including some who are illegally charging military service members for canceling their leases early due to their military obligations. It's also a time of great mistrust in government, so we've committed ourselves to improving transparency with the Public Records and Open Government Unit that we newly created. We've also proposed new improvements to the Model Public Rules Act, working closely with some transparency advocates here in Washington State. We also got our first conviction from the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and People Cold Case Unit, and we've added millions more in settlements from opioid companies to help address the damage they caused in our communities during the opioid epidemic. And we're advocating for policies in the legislature this session that will help keep our children safe from addictive online algorithms, that will give investigators better tools to hold fraudsters and other bad actors accountable, and that will help workers in our state be prepared in the event that ICE comes to their businesses. And that, honestly, is just a taste of what we're doing here every day. And I expect that this year, in 2026, will require us to reaffirm and redouble our efforts moving forward. And I know that we're built for this challenge. Happy to take any of your questions.
We've got a few bills around kind of the operations of the office and the authority and investigations. Can you kind of explain the purpose of those and why those are important to your work?
Sure. We have, as you know, a few bills that would really give us better tools to do the work that the legislature has already tasked us to do. So we enforce currently a number of different programs and laws in Washington State, the Consumer Protection Act, our law against discrimination. We protect wage and hour violations. We want to make sure that we have the tools that give us the best efficient way to accomplish those goals. So currently, for example, we have the ability, when it comes to enforcing the Consumer Protection Act, to issue CIDs to businesses, which are essentially subpoenas, to allow us to investigate any alleged consumer protection violations. We don't have that tool when it comes to enforcing the civil rights statutes of Washington State. We want to make sure that we have that tool. We don't have that tool currently to make sure that we can defend and protect workers who are being defrauded of the wages that they've earned in their jobs. So we want to make sure that we have that tool. We also have been empowered by the legislature to investigate a number of different issues here in Washington State, and that requires us using investigators and people who work somewhat covertly to make sure that they can help us accomplish those goals. And so we've got a bill that will give them a confidential ID so their identities can be protected while they're doing this work on behalf of the public. So that's the type of work that we're really focused on to make sure that we have the best tools available to accomplish these goals.
Attorney General, you just talked about transparency and accountability. You and I spoke a couple of weeks ago about DCYF and the allegations that have swirled around that agency. Since you and I talked, there's been an audit to suggest there were $500 million in two programs that did not have adequate controls, that there's been $2 million in overpayments to providers, and that the state auditor went 4 years without any sort of provider records. Given that information now, would you call for an outside audit of DCYF?
Well, my understanding from what the auditors talked about both in the past and I think as recently as today, that there's continuing audits that the auditor's office is going to do. Our job is to make sure that our clients that we represent, DCYF and other state agencies, are taking those audits very seriously and do everything they can to make sure that they're not going to have that kind of problems moving forward. I do want to distinguish what we've seen and heard about. There's, every state government, every state program that gets taxpayer dollars needs to work better with those dollars and make sure that we're treating those issues seriously. That is very different in my mind from allegations of fraud, and we want to make sure that there's a distinction between allegations of criminal fraud and allegations of, just how we best use our taxpayer dollars. So I will let the auditors speak for themselves. I think it's really important, and one of the things that makes Washington State great is that we have an independent auditor that can do that work on behalf of the public. They issue very transparent and thorough reports on many, many state agencies, and I think that work needs to continue, and it's really important that the state agency leads, the governor's office, and the rest of us take those audits very seriously.
Have you had any fraud complaints coming to your office?
Sorry, say it again.
Have you had any fraud complaints coming to your office?
Fraud complaints related to what?
Related to DCYF.
Oh, sure. I mean, we all watch the news, right? There's been a lot of reports on fraud that came into our office. Most of them are what I would view as pretty baseless allegations, but we take those allegations seriously. We work with our client agencies. We get a lot of intake in our office via email and calls alike. So there's been dozens of allegations made, and it's really important that we work with our clients to look at those and treat them seriously.
On a completely separate issue, I believe there was a ruling today in San Francisco related to the sanctuary city issue with what the president has said about February 1st and cutting off funding to states and cities. Was Washington part of that case, and what can you say about Washington's position with the threat that the federal government could cut off funding to sanctuary states and cities?
So I haven't seen that ruling, and we were not part of that case. Look, under Washington state law, there are certain limitations on law enforcement and other agencies on how they participate in federal criminal immigration enforcement. I really try to avoid the term sanctuary state or city because that means different things to different people, and it's not a legal term in any real sense. My job is to make sure that we continue to defend the law that the people of the state of Washington passed through their representatives. And any challenges to that would impose on federal law, that would violate our law, it is important that we push back against that. I feel very confident that any challenges to Washington state's laws, the Keep Washington Working Act in particular, is constitutional, that we will successfully defend that from any challenges. We're dealing with a president who threatens and bullies and attacks anything he doesn't disagree with. If you disagree with the president, if you don't bend to his will, you are going to be the target of his derision. We're also dealing with an administration and people leading his immigration efforts that operate with a level of vitriol, and I think in particular when it comes to people like Stephen Miller, a level of racism that is abhorrent. And the fact that the president is surrounded himself with a team of people who think of people that do not look like them as others, who attack people who have come to this country without basis, and then threaten states that try to provide rights for them is really, I think, a real undercutting of what it means to be an American. But my job is to defend our law. We will do that. If the legislature passes a new law, we will defend that as well. And so I'm going to keep doing everything that I can to defend the laws that protect undocumented people in this country until the legislature or the people tell me to do otherwise.
David, got any?
Yeah, this is David Dunn with the Seattle Times. You had said earlier that last spring, when you said there were elements of fascism, that you could not conceive of how lawless this president would be acting. And I just wonder what's happened in the last 6 months that has made you surprised, that leads you to say that.
Well, I don't want to get into a litany of all the things from the administration that I find abhorrent. Certainly, I think we are seeing so many things, probably most acutely in this moment, the things that are happening in Minneapolis. When we have ICE officers operating with really wanton disregard for people's rights, liberties, their humanity, that is something that I did not expect to see from this presidency. In the wake of the shooting of Renee Good, to hear the Director of Homeland Security immediately declare that no investigation was necessary, immediately declare that Renee Good was in the wrong, to hear even this morning some of the things the President had said about what was happening in Minneapolis in particular. I did not expect that, even from this President. We're also seeing on the national or international level a real disregard for our friends and allies, but I don't want to get too far afield from the things that are impacting Washingtonians in particular. But we are seeing, I think, a degree of fascism that I just did not expect from this President.
So last year was elements of fascism. To put a finer point, how would you describe the state we're in now?
More elements of fascism? Look, and I started my legal career in uniform. I signed up to serve my country. I spent a year in Iraq during the height of the Iraqi war, protecting the soldiers that were serving abroad as their lawyer. I've spent the vast majority of my career working for the government, either the federal government or the state government, including many years in the Department of Justice. I say that principally to say that I believe in this country and its promise. I consider myself definitely a patriot and someone that wants to see America and its government work for good. And I would hope that we would have a president that would actually make any effort to bring people together, to make any effort to see the people that he disagrees with and bring them to the table. That is not what we see from Donald Trump. We all see it every day. I don't care what your political beliefs or background are. When you see the president attack people on a regular basis, when you see the president go after people that he disagrees with, that is not what we should aspire to as a country. And we're also dealing in an environment where the Congress has totally abandoned their responsibility to provide any check on the president. Unless you're a retiring congressperson, you do not challenge the president if you're a Republican. We've also seen a Supreme Court that has given the president more and more authority to do as he pleases. These are all things that I think should make all Americans scary. And, there are elements of the militarization across the United States, the attacks on journalists and journalism, the freedom of the press, the attacks on people who disagree with you. These are all things that I think strike at the core of what it means to be an American.
The Senate Law and Justice Committee heard a bill this morning that would establish regulations on automated license plate readers. I was wondering if that's something you've examined or if that's something you would support.
Well, my team is looking closely at the bill and working with the legislatures who are supporting that. We continue to analyze that and provide them legal guidance, which is our principal role during the legislative session, is to work with legislators of both parties to answer questions they have about bills. I do think people are very rightly concerned about the idea that their personal information is so easily gathered and potentially shared with others. But we're looking closely at that bill and many others that might get at people's privacy.
Brent, I wanted to ask about not specifics of where you're at with your investigation, but Tacoma Urban League, Seattle Urban League, you just talked about, concern about transparency and accountability. And so I'm aware that your office is looking into that. I don't know where things are at, but with the Center Square, we've done quite a bit of reporting on it and consulted with the whistleblower, who I understand you have an investigator working with, but she's not getting cooperation back as far as finding out where that investigation stands. Can you provide any update there?
Well, like most of our ongoing investigations, unfortunately not. What I will say is that we have a very robust division within our Consumer Protection Division that looks at allegations of abuse or fraud by charities that operate here in Washington State, and prosecutes those cases civilly when there's abuse of charitable funds. But I cannot comment on that investigation or any other potentially open investigation. When we conclude, if there's something to report or if there's civil charges to be brought, that'll obviously be very transparent. But to protect the investigation, we don't comment on it.
Got the sale guns again?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to ask about your lawsuits related to gender-affirming care. You've won some court orders in the case based in Seattle, I believe. But despite this, it appears that hospitals in the area, some of them are scaling back or changing their scope of care for patients under 18. And I wonder what your thoughts are on this.
Well, let me just comment generally. So for anyone that's curious about any of our federal cases, all of our cases are on our website with links to the court documents. You can look at every single one of our cases and review our successes or failures in those cases. You know, to date, we've filed 50 cases against the administration. The vast majority of those are still ongoing, but I think in all but a couple, we have succeeded in the district court level and continue to succeed as we move up to through the appellate courts. As I said in the beginning, you know, our ability to protect about $15 billion in money that would have otherwise been cut from Washington State is really important for us, but we also protect people's rights and their liberties, and which includes the work that we've done to protect people who are seeking gender-affirming care. I understand the position that healthcare facilities are in Washington State. When you're facing an administration that will threaten your funding for unrelated programs because of your work to protect transgender people, or even will threaten your programs because of the benefits you provide to people that are undocumented, or really the threats we've seen through so many different programs and agencies because of their audacity to protect DEI programs in Washington State. I understand the pressure that those facilities are under, but I also have been so appreciative of their resilience in the face of those threats. You know, Washington has been a leader in providing healthcare services for all people for many, many years now, and I hope that we continue to have that reputation. And we do everything that we can to make sure that we've got strong legal founding to protect Washington State and our laws. Individual healthcare providers, at the end of the day, need to make their own decision. But I know that there are so many Washingtonians that depend on that care for their well-being, for their safety, and for their lives. And I hope that we continue to be that kind of state.
There was a bar complaint filed against you last year. Can you comment on its status?
Sure. There was a bar complaint that was dismissed. There was a bar complaint that was then filed against my Solicitor General, who helped author our response to that bar complaint. That was also dismissed. Then that same author of the bar complaint filed an ethics complaint against me that was dismissed. And then he filed a complaint against my Solicitor General that was also dismissed. And then he filed a complaint against the ethics board chair that was also dismissed. And so I think he's appealed the bar complaint, which we've responded to many times. It's a pretty laughable bar complaint from my perspective, and at least you can ask the bar. From my response, has been public. We put these out. You've reported on it many times. The bar complaint, I think, was pretty silly. But at the end of the day, the bar complaint will evaluate that.
All right. Have discussions started in the office about defending the police masking ban that the legislature is considering, given what's going on in California with that?
Well, as I said, my job is to defend laws that are passed by the state. That includes all the laws that are passed by the legislature. That includes the laws that are passed by the people of the state of Washington through their initiative process. That includes laws that I agree with personally as a policy matter, and many that I don't agree with. I don't pick and choose what laws that we defend. If they're passed by the people or their representatives, we defend those. So any law that might be passed this session, we will rigorously defend its lawfulness. We're in court all the time, including our state Supreme Court, to defend laws. We're going to be in court next week to defend one of the initiatives that was passed by the public last year, and we take that responsibility very, very seriously. So we have ongoing discussions with legislators all of the time about the legal risk and challenges of bills that they're contemplating, but any bill that's passed by the legislature, we will go to court and defend it.
On the youth online safety bill, are you expecting that to have seen that passing? What are you hearing from lawmakers about its chances compared to last year?
Well, let me just talk about the bill and what it does. I think many of us of all backgrounds recognize both the power and the downside of sort of the online environment, social media sites and the like. So many of us start our days by looking at our phone and looking at Twitter or looking at Instagram, what have you. We understand how consuming it can be, even for us as adults who have the wisdom and discretion and maturity to weed through the sort of the good and bad of those activities. Our kids don't have those same tools. Our kids are uniquely vulnerable to addictive algorithms, and we've seen so many horror stories of kids becoming addicted, having mental health problems, leading to suicide because of online bullying or because of their really inability to decipher truth from fiction and understand the addictive nature of some of these websites and social media sites. So we introduced a bill last year that would ask our tech companies to ban addictive algorithms for minors. Importantly, the bill allows kids with their parents to still seek out information. It does not prohibit particular websites from children. It just asks that that social media sites in particular don't force feed kids things that they didn't ask for. And so our bill bans those addictive algorithms for minors. Our bill also limits the ability of minors to be force-fed notifications during school hours and during late at night. This is a bill, as I talk to people of all backgrounds across our state, that people understand that it makes common sense, that we don't want to have our kids be uniquely susceptible to these dangers. And I feel very confident that if the legislature reviews this closely, that it'll pass. It almost passed last year. During the interim session, we worked with stakeholders from the tech industry and other people across the spectrum to better understand how we could refine and make this bill better, and it should pass. This is a bill that I think the public is thoroughly behind.
Do you have concerns about the constitutionality at all, or do you think it'll be defensible?
We'll be fine.
Last question.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I've got one more on DCYF. About a week or so ago, there was a case filed by Jim Walsh, the state GOP chair in Thurston County, that listed the state of Washington as a defendant, alleging that information was deleted or scrubbed from state websites. Has your office responded to or plan to respond to that?
Well, anytime somebody sues the state of Washington, it is our responsibility to respond. Let me say a few things. One, I cannot recall a time where the chair of the state party, of any political party, was a plaintiff in a lawsuit with a journalist. That was noteworthy to me in that particular case. And also reading the case, it's unclear to us what they're actually saying, what law was actually violated. It's a political document. It's a press release in sort of in the disguise of a lawsuit. It doesn't actually allege any violations of Washington state law. So it's, from my vantage point, a pretty baseless lawsuit. But we will respond to it through our court process. But it's unfortunate that we have sort of political debates like that through lawsuits like that. But this is what we get from the chair of the state Republican Party. Thank you all.